Hi, Claudio.
Hi, Frank.
I'm really happy. I'm sorry to have bothered you on a weekend, but I'm still very happy to talk to you today.
Very happy to be here. Thanks.
Um, because we need to talk about something very important. So, for about 20 months now, Israel has conducted what many people are calling a genocide in Gaza. And a lot of people around the world have wondered how we stop this. A lot of people also thinking that no one can do much about it because, I mean, the US will use its veto at the UN Security Council, and there's nothing much we can do. And for example, the European Union has expressed, and in some of its members through words and statements and declaration, potential sanctions coming up, potential breaches of international law. But a lot of people say, I mean, the EU cannot do anything anyway. And I'm talking to you because you are completely disagreeing with that, and you think the EU has a very important role to play to stop the genocide and, I guess, change course on what's happening in Palestine in general. We're also going to talk specifically about this leaked EU report about the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which is really a massive leverage that the EU has if he wants to to put pressure on Israel. So first, I'd like to start with what is this leak which came yesterday kind of late? So this leaked report, what does it say? Why is it important? And what should happen next?
Of course. So the report comes at the end of a long process, a very, very long reluctance from the EU as an entity, which is not a monolith, but unfortunately has awful rules, if you ask me, whereby foreign policy works by unanimity. And it's very hard to reach that on anything. And probably Israel and Palestine is the most divisive issue among the member states. But amid mounting pressure, including bottom-up pressure from people across Europe and from parliaments, there was finally, on May the 20th, the last time that the foreign ministers met, a support in the room for a proposal by the Dutch government, which in turn comes from a push from the Dutch parliament a couple months earlier, to at least launch a review of Israel's compliance with Article 2 of the Association Agreement. What is this Article 2? It's basically what's called the Human Rights Clause. So it says that the relations between the parties are based on the respect for human rights and democratic principles. And the support was there from 17 out of 27 of the foreign ministers who met, to the point that Kaja Kallas, the High Representative, the foreign minister of the EU, felt that she could give a mandate to the institutions to launch a review and assessment of that. So the document was shared with the member states yesterday late afternoon. It was almost immediately leaked, as I think the sensitivity around this issue is so strong, the pressure is so strong that it was probably inevitable that it would be. And it's a 8-pager. First page is just the title, so it's actually just 7 pages of text. It has pretty much 2 sections, one concerning possible human rights and international humanitarian law violations in Gaza, and the other one smaller concerning the West Bank. It relies on a very select number of sources, so they don't take, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, or not even UN Special Rapporteurs like Francesca Albanese and others. They simply rely on the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the International Court of Justice, and a few other independent international bodies, and they compile a list of damning findings When it comes to Gaza, the subsections are concerning the restrictions of humanitarian aid, attacks with significant numbers of casualties, attacks on hospitals, displacement, attack on journalists, and lack of accountability. When it comes to the West Bank, the subsections are settlement, consolidation, and expansion, state and settler violence, detention. And at the end of this really list of shame, like long collection of findings by the bodies that I mentioned earlier, the conclusion is, and I quote, there are indications that Israel would be in breach of its human rights obligation under Article 2 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which is, as I put it, pathetic formulation to get to, however, an inevitable conclusion. And I think you have to imagine the physical and mental pain in the office of the president of the commission as they try to make that formulation as convoluted and watered down as possible, while understanding that the evidence was so overwhelming that they couldn't not make the determination of a breach. So this is a step, but now what really matters is what happens next. So on Monday, the 23rd, the foreign ministers meet. There will not be a vote. There will be a bit of a stock taking of where things stands, understanding if the foreign ministers are willing to move on with a suspension of the agreement or not. We argue that they must. We argue that the whole exercise is futile if it's not followed by measures. We argue that they should have acted a long time ago. And we argue that they have clear legal obligations to act, as they long have had, as parties to the Genocide Conventions. All the EU27 governments are parties to the Genocide Convention. And as such, they have the legal obligation to employ all reasonable means to prevent or stop genocide. And you do not need a legal ruling from the ICJ or others to say that the genocide is happening or has happened for that obligation to be kicked in. What you need is plausibility that this is happening. And I think we are way beyond the point where you can claim that at least a plausibility is there of this crime being committed.
So like, if I try to put myself in the shoes of someone that knows nothing about EU-Israel agreements, relationships, etc., what you basically saying is that the EU and Israel, through the EU-Israel Association Trade Agreement, have a contract, right? And in a contract, like as if, you sign a contract with your employer, you've got, clause 1, clause 2, clause 3, clause 4, and the contract says if any of these clauses are breached, the contract should be nullified. Is that what you're saying in a way?
If some clauses matter more than other, and this clause is called the essential elements clause. So I think there is nothing beyond essential. So it is an essential element of the bilateral relationship and of the agreement that regulates that bilateral relationship, that says that that relationship is based on human rights and respect for democratic principle. It seems pretty clear to, I think, everyone in good faith or in not too bad faith that Israel is in massive breach, and it's now black and white in the review that we spoke about earlier.
How so you're saying like they are meeting on Monday 23rd, and then there will be a vote which is on was it July 15th? I can't remember the date of the vote, but does the vote need to be unanimous, or is it democratic? Like if it's like 13 to 14, or is it all of them have to say yes for the suspension to be acted?
Yeah, I know we are entering into EU's territory, and I will try to be not too boring on this. But basically, you have procedures to respect for the EU to take any action. And unfortunately, when it comes to foreign policy, the decision was made that each member states would retain its own foreign policy. This is not a competence that they put together. And therefore, when you need to take some measures for the EU in foreign policy, you need all the 27, because each have their own competence. It's not something that they put in common. You have the High Representative, which is supposed to lead, to coordinate the foreign policy of the EU, but at the end of the day, each of the 27 member states has a veto power. So that said, if you want to suspend the whole association agreement with Israel, which is a foreign policy instrument, which also has a trade pillar, and we'll talk about that in a second, then you need all the 27 on board. And this, unfortunately, seems science fictional, given the position of Hungary, the Czech Republic, Germany, and others. But then, this association agreement also has a trade pillar. Basically, the trade relations between the EU and Israel, and the fact that there are no tariffs it's like a free trade agreement between the EU and Israel. This pillar of the agreement concerns trade. Now, trade is a competence that they put in common. Trade is a competence that you do not have, Italy's own trade and France's own trade, but they put in common that. And this makes it that you do not need unanimity anymore to suspend that pillar. But since it's a common competence, all you need is what is called a qualified majority, which is 55% of the member states, representing at least 65% of the population in the EU. It's still a high threshold, but it's not unanimity. It's not impossible as the unanimity is. So that measure they can take not by unanimity, but by qualified majority. Now, on Monday, they will not vote on that, not necessarily in July. I think what's going to happen on Monday is Kaja Kallas will kind of check the temperature in the room and see where member states stand. Would they feel comfortable? Would they be willing to take some measure, and if so, which measure? I think a possible place to land is where there is enough support for a possible sectoral suspension of the trade pillar. So you do not suspend the trade pillar in full, but maybe some sectors in the trade. Also, this would not ban trade between the EU and Israel, to be absolutely clear. What it would do is it would reinstate the tariffs. So, trade would become less profitable on both sides. Whether there will be a vote in July when the foreign ministers meet next depend kind of on the meeting on Monday. If Kaja Kallas feels that there is enough appetite for the foreign ministers to support some measures for the suspension, then I think there will be a mandate to the Commission to draft the legal documents that are necessary in order to suspend at least a part of the agreement. If instead that is not the case, which we really hope is not what is going to happen, then there will be no vote in July, I'm afraid. So we'll see how it goes on Monday. Really.
And can you explain why this association agreement is so important for the EU, but even more so for Israel?
Absolutely. So the EU is Israel's main trading partner. Few people know this and may think that it's the US, but it's actually Israel. And the bilateral trade, I'm seeing the official figures from the Commission in 2024 was 42.6 billion. So, a big part of the Israeli economy actually relies on the EU-Israel Association Agreement. If you reinstate the tariffs, you cause an economic damage, if you want. And so you kind of take the first coercive measure in reaction to everything that Israel has been doing in Gaza and in the West Bank. Now, one thing, Frank, that I think it's very important to point out is that Gaza was probably the trigger. The images of people being killed as they tried to scramble for food, to go into the places where they're told to go to take food and then they're killed. They were probably, where the point of too much for the population in Europe and even for some of the ministers. But while Gaza is the trigger, it is not the scope of the review. Article 2 does not say Israel should respect human rights in Gaza. Article 2 says Israel should respect human rights, period. That applies to Gaza, that applies to the West Bank, that applies to East Jerusalem, that applies to Israel proper, that applies to Lebanon, to Syria, to Yemen, and so on, and so forth. And indeed, this is why one of the sections of the review that we talked about also includes the West Bank. And I will argue that even if you take Gaza completely out of the picture, say that there is utter peace in Gaza, and things are well, there are no war crimes and no hospitals bombed, and you only take the advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice in July 2024 that makes findings of apartheid and racial segregation throughout the occupied territory, that makes findings that the occupation is illegal, that makes finding that the right to self-determination of Palestinians. How is any of that alone, forget Gaza, how is any of that compatible with the Article 2 and with the Human Rights Clause? So there is long been ground for the suspension. Gaza makes, of course, things even more apocalyptic and horrific and urgent for the EU to act, but the breach from the Israeli authorities of the obligations under the Article 2 has been there for a very, very long time.
So my next question is like, what can we do? Like the civil society, the people of this world. On June 18th, there was a joint statement signed by, I think, more than 110, and correct me if I'm wrong, NGOs, human rights organizations, asking for the EU to, in a way, fulfill its obligations. As we explained, Israel is clearly in breach of your contract. The contract you have with Israel. I mean, we both know, and you've explained, that Israel has been in breach of this Article 2 for years and years. What can we do if we truly live in democracies? What can the people do to put pressure on the foreign ministers of the EU states to actually act and suspend this trade agreement?
Absolutely. So, look, I think there is a strong sense of frustration, anger. Probably you and I and many other people who will listen to this share that feeling. And you hosted Tanya Hassan in the past, and she came out of Gaza asking people there, what can I do for you? And they told her, just go out and tell our stories. There is no way that if you tell our stories, the governments will not act, right? How could anybody not act as we see this? And as a matter of fact, they haven't acted. And so there is a very strong sense of frustration and anger among us. How can our governments not act, not stop these that we see day in, day out on Instagram, on Twitter, anywhere? And there might be a feeling that, okay, you know what, it's game over, it's not working, let's think about other crises, let's just accept. It is not how it's working. It's actually working. Too late, 60,000 at least lives too late, enormous amount of destruction and suffering too late, but it's not been in vain. All the demonstrations, all the any act, letters, statements, pressure on the government, protests. We have seen in Brussels an amazing one just last Sunday with over 100,000 people taken to the street, and across Europe. This is actually creating pressure. This is not happening in vain. Yes, it is too slow, but it's happening. And what we need is for the institutions, the EU, the governments, everybody who has average, to break the impunity. Everything that is happening, everything that Israel is doing, as we said in an event in the parliament a couple of months back, is grounded on impunity. If you make one war crime and nobody says anything, and then you make the second and nobody says anything, and then you make the third, and so on and so forth, why would you stop? Right? This is the problem. And the illusion and the fairy tale by some EU governments, there is nothing we can do, the US will veto the Security Council. I say bollocks. There is a lot you can do as EU. You have a toolbox, you have trade, you have targeted sanctions. You have the tools to put very real pressure on the Israeli government. The fact is that you didn't. You never did. So you cannot tell me that you cannot do anything when you don't do anything in the first place. You cannot tell me that your pressure doesn't work when you didn't put that pressure in the first place. So we need to break these lies and these ideas and to push for the measures to be taken. Now, the suspension of the agreement is one of the tools that the US, there are more. As a matter of fact, the EU has never even said that there is a single war crime committed by Israel in Gaza. You never had the unanimous EU20 because, the governments of Hungary, Czech Republic, Germany, and others will be uncomfortable with that. So we're not even calling out any crime. People talk about genocide. We are talking about not even an international humanitarian law violation by Israel. So that's where impunity starts. And once you acknowledge that these crimes are being committed, as I hope is the case with the review that we talked about earlier, then member states must act. And they can adopt the sanctions, they can call out the crimes, they can act at the UN, they can suspend agreements, they can suspend the arms. Every individual member state can do that. You do not need the unanimity in the Council, and they must use this leverage. The fact that it's working, the fact that the pressure is very slowly, unfortunately, painfully slowly getting to a bit of a shift in the EU and in the governments on how to deal with the situation in Palestine, I think is a testament to the fact that pressure actually works. I hope that it gives us all a bit of hope that things can actually change. And let me add, this also a testament to the over 200 journalists and media workers who have been killed in Gaza while documenting the egregious crimes by the Israeli authorities there. So they didn't die in vain. People are not dying in vain. I'm sorry that we are too late, but things are moving, and I think the inertia is positive. As you break the silence, more and more feel emboldened to. And this includes artists, this includes singers, this includes governments, and you now had 3 EU governments, 4 EU governments, 3.5, who say that there is a genocide there. Things are changing slowly but steadily, I would say. And this should be a bit of a reason for hope.
Thanks for this, Claudio. I forgot to mention that you are the Associate Director for EU Advocacy at Human Rights Watch. So you have worked on EU-Israel relationships and trade agreements and for years. And so you know obviously what you're talking about. And what you're saying is that the EU as a body, but also EU member states individually, have a massive role to play. And I think we are at a point in history where government and states have a choice to make, on which side of history do you want to be? And the EU also as a body has this choice, do you want to align forever with US foreign policy, or do you want to, as a body, as a power in this world, take a different route? So again, grazie mille, Claudio, for your input and your insights into this. Thanks.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks for hosting.